Coming up on episode 49 of Create If Writing, we are talking all about how to brand your voice across social media platforms.
I can't go back to sleep, it's almost light. These restless thoughts have kept me up again tonight.
So welcome to Create If Writing. I'm your host, Kirsten Oliphant, and I am so glad that you are listening. This is the podcast for writers and bloggers and other creatives, you're all welcome, who want to build an online platform without feeling smarmy. We are in the middle of a 4-week series on audience building, but I am interrupting the regularly scheduled programming to bring you something different. I am actually speaking this week, tomorrow, as I record this, on June 30th, I'll be speaking at Social Media Day Houston. And Social Media Day is something that's actually nationwide, and different cities will host this and kind of run it different ways depending on the city. And I'm really honored to be able to speak at Houston's Social Media Day. And I'm really excited about it because after spending 8 days alone with my kids, I get to go out tomorrow and be with adults for an entire day. Now, as an introvert, I might prefer to spend a whole day alone in a room, but I will take adult conversations, not that kind of adult, but conversations with adults about social media and nerdy online blogging stuff. So that's tomorrow. And I thought it would be really good practice for me getting ready for my talk. And also just, it's great content. So I am interrupting the audience building, and we'll be back next week with the final week of audience building, where we'll talk about where to find your target readers, other places, and bring them back. So before I dive into talking about branding your voice across social media platforms, I want to also just say a huge thank you to those of you guys who already are in my community and on my email list who have picked up my book, Email Lists Made Easy for Writers and Bloggers, which launched this week. Woohoo! It will actually be 99 cents through July 1st. So starting July 2nd, it will go back up to the normal price of $4.99. And it's only available on Amazon now, but I'm working on the formatting to put it on Kobo and iBooks. And also I will have a PDF version, if that's your jam, that you can get on the site. But all those are not up yet. It's just on Amazon. So I would love it if you haven't gotten yours to get yours. Again, it's 99 cents, which is a steal. And it's a book all about basically what it says in the title, making email lists easy. I mean, they're not easy. So really it should be email lists made easier, but that just doesn't have the same ring to it, does it? So it's going to walk you through everything from email service providers. And even if you've already chosen one, maybe it'll help confirm you're with the right one, or kind of give you an idea of, once you hit a certain number or a certain amount of money per month, you want to switch to a different one. But it'll talk about growth, content, what you should send, freebies, how to talk to your subscribers, how to get them to open your emails, and so much more. So if you are just starting out with email, this will be great for you. But also if you have an email list and you just aren't happy with how it's going, and it doesn't really matter the size, I think that the tips in here and kind of the way that I talk about email is going to help sort of translate some of the lessons that I've learned from entrepreneurs and from my own experience, but translates them into a way that's helpful for specifically writers and bloggers, because I think email is a lot easier if you are an entrepreneur or using your email just for business, because it's pretty clear why you're using it. And I think people know when they sign up to your list that you're going to be selling them things, you're going to provide content, but also it's a business that's clear up front. But for writers and bloggers, often it just feels a little different. Promotion feels different. How we think about marketing feels different. And I think we tend to struggle more with self-promotion, and email feels really heavy and burdensome sometimes. And so I really want to take that feeling out and translate some of the helpful lessons, but in a way that makes sense. Because when I love listening to Amy Porterfield and some of the other, Pat Flynn's and the different people talking about online marketing. But when writers and bloggers are talking about email, we don't even use the same terms sometimes. We don't think of it as email marketing. That's not how I think of emails I send to my readers. And we don't talk about our readers as leads. We don't talk about lead magnets so much. Those words don't make as much sense to us. And it's not just semantics. I think it goes deeper than that. So again, I've taken some helpful lessons, things I have learned, things I've learned from other people, things I've experienced, turn them into something that I think will be really helpful for you if you want to see results and really grow your email list. So that's 99 cents on Amazon. And I'm actually going to create a short link. So if you want to go right from here, I know you could search for it on Amazon and you'll find it. You could also go to createifwriting.com/email book. And that will redirect you over to Amazon. So that just makes it a little easier to remember. createifwriting.com/email book. And again, a big thank you to everyone in my community who has already purchased. It actually got the little orange banner from Amazon as a bestseller. So that's what happens when you put your book at 99 cents sometimes and get some good promotion going. But really, it's all thanks to you guys, the community. And maybe in a future episode, I'll talk about the rationale behind that. Because if you sell your book for 99 cents, I didn't look at the numbers for how many copies I've sold or the money, because it gets depressing, because really you make like 20 cents off a 99 cent book, and that's not the value of the book. So it's really frustrating. But at the same time, there's reasons I did that, and getting that little bestseller tab and getting seen in those searches is a really good reason for that. So if you haven't gotten your book, snag it. If you have gotten it and you have something to say about it, I would love an honest review on Amazon, and that really helps the book also get found by more people. But yeah, I'm very excited. It's been a long time since I put a book up on Amazon. This was the first time I did not have any crazy formatting disasters. Usually it's been a nightmare, so I'm really thankful for that. I did have a disaster with lead pages and my email list. That's a whole other issue. And that was just my issue. So yes, it was really exciting to put that out, and I'm really excited to see that it's doing well. Okay, this has been a long intro. So I want to start in and talk to you guys about branding your voice for social platforms. First, I want to start by talking a little bit about branding itself, because that's one of those words that gets thrown around a whole lot. And if you have studied branding at all, you kind of have a better idea of what it is. But if you haven't, then I think we tend to think of visual things. We tend to think of logos. We think of images. I don't know why the Target symbol always comes to my mind when I think about branding, but branding isn't just visual. It is the entire message that you have to present. It's kind of who you are, your identity, wherever you share it. And so your branding is actually a bigger picture. It's the values that you hold. It's the way you talk about them. It's kind of how people view you, and it is the visuals as well. But sometimes it's really easy. I think visuals are easier, and maybe that's one of the reasons we think about them. And also, we are visual people, and so they're very easily recognizable when we have those really great brands that have that really pretty, whatever it is that draws us, that makes it memorable. We do remember those things, but branding is a much bigger picture than that. So your writing voice, talking about that in terms of branding, your writing voice gives your words personality. It gives them distinction. It gives them uniqueness. It gives them oomph. It gives them power. And that is really important when it comes to branding, because your writing voice makes you stand out, just the way a logo from Target does not look like a logo from McDonald's. Your branding and your voice will make your voice stand out from other people's. And I also think one of the reasons we think of visual, writing is really hard. Branding your writing voice, it takes a different skill set. I mean, you could always hire a designer to do a logo if that's not something you could do yourself. Most of us probably shouldn't do our own logos, but maybe that's in your skill set. But your writing voice, it's a much bigger picture, and you don't just do it one time. It's an over and over again thing, but it does make you stand out just like a visual logo does. It makes people recognize your words and your message through those words. So I want to talk a little bit, or actually a lot, on the how. How do you develop your unique writing voice? If you were an English major or did a lot of writing classes, then this is something you may have learned some about, but it tends to not be something we talk about a whole lot as adults. And it, if you maybe you like to write, maybe you don't, but as users of social media and blogs and everything else, we need to be able to write, and we need to kind of brush up on some of those skills, but it can feel kind of boring to us. It can feel kind of dry. So I don't want it to feel that way. And so we're going to kind of look at it in ways that hopefully will not feel like that, but it really is an important part of your branding to develop that writing voice. So we're going to go back, as I always do in my trainings, to think about the why. Why do you exist? And I don't mean in an existential way, but what is it that your particular brand, company, or why are you doing the things that you do? What is the purpose behind it? And that's always so important when it comes to whether it's branding your writing voice as we're talking about today, or planning out even things like the visual layout of your blog, that really matters. And it matters in the intricacies of thinking about things like, why do I exist? Well, I'm here, I have this blog, I have this brand I've started because I need to make money because I'm providing for my family or myself. That will look different. It will feel different. It may sound different than if you had the freedom to not depend on that brand in your business for your financial stability. You might have some more freedom to perhaps be a little bit more lenient on some of the guidelines that I'll talk about later. But you do need to think about why you exist, both in terms of that practical sense of like, okay, are you making a living with this? Is it just a passion project, a side project? Is it a side project you want to become a main project? And also thinking about the why of who do you serve? Like, who are your people? What are you doing for them? And that's really important too, because as you start to think about who are your people, you will start to know who you're talking to, and you can talk to them better. You can develop a writing voice that reaches the specific target audience that you have. So you really need to take some time to think about who your people are so that you can be speaking their language. And then I think one of the most important things as we get into the guidelines and kind of this how, the nitty-gritty of this, is how do you want people to describe you? If you had, a room full of people kind of doing a survey or kind of looking at your overall brand, what are some of the words that you would want them to use to describe you and your brand? And I have some examples of just kind of words in case this is, sometimes you need visuals, sometimes you need examples to get a sense of this. Would you want people to describe you as quirky, authoritative, fun, academic, genuine, witty, wise, kind? These are just some of the words that people might use to describe you. Some of those are words that I'd love to be described as fun and quirky, but also wise and maybe authoritative. But you need to think about the kinds of words that you would want those target people to describe you as. And then we're going to try to find a way to put that into your words so that those are the things people are going to describe you as. And kind of as an example of this, I wanted to look at two different people who do craft type businesses. So Martha Stewart, and I went and looked at her website to see if she actually had a tagline, but she doesn't. I'm sure one day she did back in the day when she needed a tagline, but now we all know who Martha Stewart is and we know what she presents. It's very clean. It's very perfect. It's very professional. You look at everything she has, everything is beautiful. You're not going to find Martha Stewart talking about mistakes, or if she does, it's still in a way that makes you feel like, yeah, but she's still perfect. Okay. It's like, that's just who she is. That's her brand. It's expensive. It's classic and classy. That's who Martha Stewart is. And then taking an example from a local Houston blogger, Bobby Bird from Clumsy Crafter, her tagline on her craft blog is "Where glue guns get deadly." And I think so much is summed up into that little tagline. That does such a great job of setting the tone. And there's more things on her blog and on that main page that set the tone for that. But if you're not Martha Stewart, where the whole world doesn't recognize your name, you do need some of these cues to help people understand. And things like even the colors that you use will help set that tone. But the words like a tagline that you have on your blog or something you put on your business card, the descriptions in your profiles, all of those things set the tone to help people get to know you. So Clumsy Crafter, she doesn't just talk about crafts, but neither does Martha Stewart. But where glue guns get deadly, there's a sense of humor. There's maybe the sense that sometimes there are mistakes that happen with the crafting and that she's going to share those. There's a sense that she's going to be real with you. It's much more approachable. Martha Stewart, you're going to go to for beauty and perfection. I'm not ever going to make anything that Martha Stewart has in her blog. That's just the reality. Clumsy Crafter, on the other hand, I will, because I know she's someone like me. So I am more of her target audience. Martha Stewart, I'm not her target audience. And I know that. I know that immediately. I know that because I've, again, she's much more famous. So she has these, you come to understand the things about her overall from the years that she has done her work. So something else to think about as you are kind of trying to develop this writing voice and how you want people to describe you is what can you sustain? And I particularly want to talk about this when it comes to humor, because humor is something I really love to use in writing. And I'm not always the best humor writer. I'm much funnier in like one-liners. Like if I'm writing a whole blog post, it probably won't make you laugh out loud, especially thinking about somebody like the Blogess. Her posts make me laugh out loud. Her whole book, I laughed and cried through the whole thing. I can't do that. My humor comes more in the one-line, snarky, witty, sarcastic replies to things on Facebook, replies on Twitter, or tweets themselves. So I'm looking at what I can sustain. And it's okay if you can't sustain that voice fully through a blog post. I still have that tone a little bit in my blog post, but they're not going to be laugh out loud funny. But you have to think about that. What can you sustain? If you decide I want people to think of me as funny, maybe you should ask someone, am I funny? Because you may think you're funny and you may not be, or it may not be something you can sustain. You may get really tired of it. Maybe you can do it, but it takes you so long to write a blog post that's funny that you just never get anything done. So you need to think about what's sustainable for you. And if it's not something that's kind of natural to you anyway, it's going to be really difficult. And that's not to say you can't train yourselves, but in this busy world, unless you really, really have a particular voice that you want to hone and work toward, you want to use something that makes more sense and is natural or more natural towards who you already are. And that leads us into the next part of the how. So those were some questions to get you thinking about what you want to create. And then now we're going to talk about creating a persona. Now, the term persona is one that was used kind of, I think, before the term avatar to mean kind of your ideal client. And some people still use it. Most circles I feel like that I run in, they use the word avatar, which I hate. But we're going to be talking about persona, creating a persona for yourself. And in writing a persona it tends to talk about, like, if you're thinking about a first person narrative, like if you're reading a book that's told from like the I perspective, like I did this and thought that. The persona is kind of the sense you get of that person, like all those descriptive words I put above. It's kind of all of those things. And so you need to create a persona for yourself, because let's be honest, even if you are the most honest person and you share every single thing across social media, you hold nothing back, you probably still hold some things back. The reality of it is, even the most transparent people who like to share the good, the bad, and the ugly, they do hold some things back. We are not fully ourselves when it's told through the filter of social media. We're just not. And I think it's a good thing that we're not. And if you have friends, which I'm sure you do on Facebook or another platform, who really hold nothing back, you know how annoying that is. Because you'll have the people that will vague book, which, means they hint at something, but don't really tell you about these terrible things and terrible people and what's happening in their life. And it just gets really burdensome. Nobody wants to read these kinds of posts again and again and again from people. You have to hold some things back. So when you create a persona for yourself, you are kind of deciding how you want people to see you, what you're going to give them, and what you're going to hold back. Now, your persona, it needs to not be something totally fake, because again, thinking about sustainability, you can't sustain that. And also, you may not want to sustain that. It gets really exhausting. Again, if you're coming from a place of writing more like who you are, then it's going to be easier for you to sustain. And that doesn't mean you have to share every part of who you are. And we're going to get to that in a second. But it does need to feel natural. Your persona should line up with who you are. Who I am on this podcast, who I am on Twitter, who I am on Facebook. Pinterest is not really personal so much, but on these social platforms, on my blog, that is who I am. Is it the entire picture of who I am? No, because you really can't encompass that, and you wouldn't want to. So the persona is sort of taking who you are and crafting it into what people are going to see and what you want them to see. So we're going to talk about developing guidelines. I gave some examples. When you're developing guidelines, you may want to think about, okay, are you going to share on Facebook, for example, on your Facebook page, are you going to share humor or not share humor? Are you going to talk about religion? Are you going to talk about politics? You are thinking about what things should be included. What would your persona share? And what would they not share? Because there are going to be some things maybe you want to share on your Facebook personal profile, unless you're using that in terms of people being able to follow you, but then you could set your profile settings. But I'm going to assume you have a personal profile for Facebook that you are not necessarily sharing with the world. And then maybe you have a Facebook page, or if you're not using Facebook for your business, then you're using Twitter or Snapchat or Instagram or something else. Again, Pinterest, I don't think it applies as much. It's a little different, and we can talk about that. But for the most part, the social media is where you're social and you're sharing a voice. So when you think about your persona, you're going to use guidelines to help you establish consistency. These things are going to help you know what to share and what not to share. And if you have things you want to share that don't go with your persona, then you can share them on that personal Facebook profile that not everyone's going to see that's related to your business. It's really important to think, as we kind of develop these guidelines, to think about each platform in context. For example, and I'm using kind of extremes here, Instagram does not equal LinkedIn. And I think we all know that, but just in case you weren't sure, Instagram is not like LinkedIn. The things that even if you have a profile on both, which I do, I don't really use either, but if you have a profile on both, if you're going to share a piece of content, even if you want to share the same piece of content, you would share it a different way. Each platform has its own context. So you need to know the platform. And I don't mean just know the platform in and of itself, which is important. It's important to know the kinds of ways people use Twitter, the kinds of ways people use LinkedIn and Instagram, even if they're not all the same. Maybe you need to think about your niche, how people share within that niche. But even in an overall sense, you can kind of get an understanding of how people share things on Twitter differently than Instagram. People post on Twitter. If you post on Twitter 100 times a day, it's fine. It really is not a big deal. If you did that on Instagram, it would not work. And the same thing for LinkedIn. So each platform has its own variances and you kind of need to know them. And I think a lot of people at this point do know them. And if you want to get to know them, you need to spend time on each. But I mean, you also need to know the platform in terms of your own readers. You need to look at the demographics, you need to look at the analytics and everything else you can to know the types of users and the ways that people post on the platform. You need to know the ways that your followers in specifics using your analytics interact with, read, comment, respond to your content. And the great thing is that most of these platforms have that available for free. Sometimes you can pay more and use another service that will give you more information, but Twitter has great analytics. You can look right there to see what people are sharing, when they're sharing it, how they're sharing it. Are they retweeting? Are they quoting? Are they responding? Are they liking? What are they doing with that content? What are they ignoring? And when did you send it? What kind of content? Can you find patterns there? The same with Facebook. If you have a Facebook page, and this is a reason, again, I think most people tend to use a page. I do know some who have a personal profile that people can follow, but if you're using a page, you're going to have the benefit of those insights, and they go pretty deep, and you can really look at the demographics of your readers and what they are sharing to get to know the kinds of things that are important on each platform, and they may not be the same because you may have people that follow you on every platform, but they only actively use one. And you may have people that only follow you on one platform and have no idea what you're doing on the others. Thinking about that, you want to keep cross-sharing to a minimum and be platform specific. Like I said with the Instagram and LinkedIn example, if you're on both and you want to share a blog post, the way you share it will probably be different. It should be different. So you're not going to create a Facebook post and then, let's start with Instagram. You're not going to create an Instagram image and then click the share button and share that exact thing to Facebook, because the square images sometimes look fine on Facebook, but if you're sharing it, it might show up as a link. It might not show the image itself. Same thing, you're not going to take that Instagram and link it to Twitter unless you're using certain tools will show the image, some won't. And a square image doesn't always show necessarily on Twitter. Image sizing is the biggest thing, really. Well, not the biggest, but one of the big things that your images, each social media platform, just to be difficult, has its own ideal image sizes. So if you're just clicking to share, it becomes really clear very quickly to your followers that you're just kind of throwing up posts. You're not really intentionally thinking about each platform. And if your Twitter followers do not follow you on Instagram and they see this kind of like photo that shows up and it doesn't show the whole photo and maybe the important part is missing and it doesn't, all the words don't fit because again, it's Twitter. And then you have the link that shows that it's from Instagram. People tend to gloss over those. Now, every once in a while, you may want to cross-share so that you can grow your follower. Like maybe your Twitter followers would love your Instagram, which is different. So maybe you do cross-share every once in a while, or maybe you just talk about the fact that you're on another platform. Like, see what we did today if you click over to Instagram. Even that takes more intention on Twitter than just clicking the share button through Instagram. So you want to keep that cross-sharing to a minimum and be platform specific. But you do also, I think it's an okay idea to have people tell people and be upfront about the fact that you're on different platforms and they should come. And we're going to create guidelines in just a second, but kind of as a general idea or general thought, you are going to make these guidelines that are going to help you, but you're also going to think about when you can break your rules. And I think this is a really important point to note, because you're going to have these guidelines or rules that you're going to establish for yourself, but is it ever okay to break them? And the answer, I think, is yes, but it depends how. It's okay to break those rules if it's all about impact, because sometimes it is very, very impactful. I tend to write, even if I'm not being humorous, laugh out loud funny, on my personal blog, KirstenOliphant.com, which is a lifestyle blog and a little bit more personal than my sort of business creative writing blog. When I'm there, I don't write necessarily laugh out loud humor, but I'm a little bit more lighthearted, and I may use some witty sarcasm and shortened sentences and things like that. But every now and then, either there's an event that's really impactful to me in my own personal life, or there's a world event that I want to address. And so I do talk in a more serious tone. And when I do talk in a more serious tone, not only is the tone different, where you can feel that it's serious and I'm not being as lighthearted, but also I tend to have more poetic sentences, longer sentences, things that are just a little bit different in terms of how I write. It's a different writing process even for me when I'm writing those posts. I can write a post that's humorous about my day and parenting while sitting in front of the television. If I'm writing a more serious post, I really can't do that unless I'm sitting in my room all alone, no noise, no distractions. It's got to be just taking that time to actually put in the effort for that. And it really is all about impact, because when people read a post from me that's different, they sit up and take notice because they know it's not the same. They know that it's something different. And it is something that makes them take a little bit of time to think about what I'm saying and read it more carefully. Whereas if I wrote all posts that were serious, they don't quite have as much impact. And not to say that you can't have a fully serious blog, but for me, if I want to really make an impact, then I do something out of the ordinary and maybe break my rules. Now, if you're going to break your rules, you can, but you don't want to discredit your persona. And what I mean by that is it would be really, really weird for me. I'm trying to think of an example of something that I wouldn't ever share. I don't really share about politics. So if I went into a political rant on my blog, that would alienate everybody, because politics alienates everybody, but it would also discredit my persona because that's not something I talk about. It would shock people and make an impact that's negative. It might make my readers feel like, hey, I don't know her at all. Not because of my stance necessarily, but because of it's a rant, and I don't rant. That's not something I typically do, or if I do, it's in a funny way, ranting about bad drivers on the highway or something that's still humorous. So I want to go through the guidelines and get a little bit specific here and talk about how you can create your own guidelines. And if you go to the show notes for this episode, which are going to be at createifwriting.com/049, then I'm going to have some guideline resources for you so that you can develop your own guidelines. Okay, so the first thing I want you to think about, and these are all going to kind of harken back a little bit to the overall message that I talked about, is you need to think about your vibe and your voice. So this is things like, for me, I'll just share, we'll go through the guidelines and I'll kind of share my own so that I'll help give you kind of a perspective. I want people to see me and describe me as trustworthy. And this isn't a tone, this is kind of an overall impression. I want them to describe maybe my voice or kind of who I am as snarky or witty, probably less snark and more wit. Generous, because I want to give a lot of value. Smart, because I want people, it's important to be seen as knowing what you're doing if you're trying to teach people something, which I am. At times, I'm a little bit self-deprecating. I'm not afraid to share my mistakes, and that's something important to think about. Some people don't. A lot of people do. I feel like we're living in an age when people talk about authenticity and all of those kinds of things where you have to be yourself, and really they mean your persona, because again, you're not being your full self on social media. But I'm self-deprecating. Some people don't share the mistakes to the extent that I did. One of my most popular posts this year was the biggest mistakes I made of last year. And I gave a specific number. I made $1,300 worth of mistakes last year. Maybe more, but those are the ones I could pinpoint. And that number made me want to barf. But I shared it because that's part of my persona. I'm willing to go there because I think it helps my people. Now, something just as a side note, if you're going to be self-deprecating, make sure it's in a way that's helpful. Again, that post was really helpful to people. It was not a woe is me, I need you guys to encourage me because I made some mistakes. That is not really attractive, just in any way at all. So just think about that. You have to, if you're going to be self-deprecating, share mistakes, you have to think about how that's going to impact your readers. And people don't like pity parties, just as a general rule. Save that for your friendships, and they may not like it either, but don't put it on social media. Another thing, after you think about vibe and voice, those are kind of the ways I want people to describe me or think of me. And I hope I'm right about that. Sometimes you have to ask your audience, and you may find that you're not conveying that at all. Also fun. I want to be fun. And so I'm dealing with something platform building, which for my particular audience, which is bloggers and specifically writers, it is not fun. Platform is not fun. A lot of people, that's the thing they hate. And so I want to make it fun because I do enjoy it. So there is that sense of fun and lightheartedness as well. As far as the things I'm not going to talk about. So you need to make a list of those things that are going to be just off limits all the time. And maybe some of them you'll break the rules, but some of them it literally may be like, don't ever, no matter how much you're tempted, no matter how many political things make you mad, you're not going to talk about politics. And that's me. Maybe on my personal profile on Facebook, but really I don't even talk about politics then. And there's reasons for that. My reasons are because I think we are at a point in history where the two-party system, and see, look, I'm going on a rant, you guys, the two-party system makes us such a divided nation. It makes things seem black and white when none of them really are. And it just sets us up to not have conversations, but to pit one another against each other. And so I really hate that. I would really love it if we had more than a two-party system. So that's my little side note. But I think no matter what you're going to say politically, you are going to create a division. And I don't want that to be the thing for me. I don't want that to be a wall that I put up where people who are of a different political persuasion, and honestly, like, I don't even want to get into, I'm not sure I have a full political persuasion because I just hate politics. However, I don't want to tell people, okay, because they are that divisive right now, especially in this point in history. They're so divisive. If you put something up, you're going to offend half of the other people who are going to immediately think that you're stupid or dislike you because of those beliefs, no matter how you say them. So politics is just one of those areas. I'm not going to break my rules. I'm not going to go there. Religion, that tends to be one people don't talk about, but I will break this rule. And this isn't a full rule for me. This is one of those that tends to be one for people, but I am a Christian. I do talk about this on my personal lifestyle blog. It doesn't come through as much in creative writing, but people know that. You know, the other day in my Facebook group, someone asked for prayer. And my Facebook group, and actually my audience for both places, is probably about 50-50 people who are Christians and people who aren't. Because again, I'm not trying to attract that audience necessarily or build it. That's just who I am. So I think that comes through and does attract some Christian people, but that's not overall my message. And I talked to my group administrator, Matt McCarrick, and I was like, hey, I love that people are asking for this. And clearly like someone's hurting. I don't want to like delete this, but is this appropriate? And we had this whole conversation because I don't want people in the group who are not Christians, which is probably, again, 50 or more percent, to feel like this is a group they don't belong in anymore because of that. And we decided actually to leave it because a lot of times people, no matter what you are, if you're struggling with something, you'll ask for prayer. And I really liked that my group, even though it's not a personal group, it's almost 500 people and it's not about personal requests, but I liked that there's a sense of community there that this person felt they wanted to share that. And so that's kind of our discussion. Now, if that becomes something that goes on, then, you know, as an admin, that's something we'll have to deal with and talk about. But in any case, religion and faith, it's not something that's going to come through all the time. If it does come through, if I do want to write about it, which is going to be on my personal blog. And again, some of these guidelines, you may have to make separate ones. I want my whole persona. I want people to see my whole persona as fitting. So if you come to my personal blog and then go to creative writing, I want it to make sense. I don't want those to be different because again, like I said, with kind of breaking your rules, if you're sort of denying or defying that persona, you're going to make people not trust you because then they feel like it's fake. So I'm me both places, but I might share different content on one blog than another. So I do talk about faith sometimes on the Kirsten Oliphant blog. And again, it tends to be more like a rule break because it's not something I talk about in every post for sure. And usually it's not something I even talk about in a heavy way. Like it may just get a mention here or there. Every so often, I do write a longer post that is faith-based. But because I know my audience and I know that my audience is about 50% or more, not people who would identify as Christians, I write in a way that sort of strips out the language that I would use if I were writing just to a Christian audience. So like I take out what Christians sometimes call Christianese, where you're using those words that are really familiar to that particular audience because those words may not be understandable or relatable to a non-Christian audience who is not familiar with those kinds of terms. So I'm really careful to write about it in a way that is still inviting. It's not offensive. It's not harsh or off-putting. I mean, religion in itself, sometimes just even mentioning any kind of religion is off-putting. I think Jesus especially can be a really offensive person. He just is. And so to me, that's offensive enough that I'm talking about it, or that it's Jesus and not just a general God, which people tend, if you talk about God, sometimes people are like, oh, okay, I can get on board. But if you mention Jesus, it's a little bit like, hey now. So I make sure if I'm going to go there, that I'm going to be doing it in a way that is inviting, not harsh, not speaking a language that only a certain group will understand, but is open and for my audience. So again, if you, like I've just shared a whole bunch about that one particular topic about religion, if you're going to break your rules, as you make your guidelines, you may have to make smaller guidelines within them. So I have guidelines for myself, even within my guidelines, talking about how I will talk about faith if I talk about it at all. And then thinking about for your guidelines, what kind of content you're going to share. Most people share other people's content, most people. Now I have heard recently of a lot of people who won't share anybody else's content, which I don't get fully. I understand their reasoning. They were saying they don't want to send people other places. And it was somebody that was big. It wasn't like somebody that was a newbie that doesn't understand how the world works. It was somebody that has a pretty big platform and saying they don't share other people's content. They want people to come to them. And I have seen people like that. But I think for the most part, we're all sharing things from other people. And I do think that's a benefit. I think it connects you with people. There's a lot of reasons I think that, but it establishes relationships and is a really good thing to share other relevant content that would speak to your audience. I don't think that means you're going to lose your readers because you share someone else's great post. Thinking about each platform, you may have to make your own set of guidelines for what you share where. Facebook, I have a page and it's for KirstenOliphant.com. That's my lifestyle blog. The things I share there are very different than what I share in my Creative Writing Facebook group. Creative Writing is for this podcast. You should join if you want to join and you're not in there. It's creativewriting.com/community. And we do have a community there. So I don't share my parenting posts in there. That's not what that's about. Sometimes we have share threads, but even if we had that, I'm not sure that's what I'd share. So that's going to look really different than on my page. And my page, there's not so much community on a page. You have people respond. Sometimes you hope, but Facebook likes to squish that. So I do share humor. I share funny videos. I share like I'm a mom. That's just kind of my mom outlet. This is funny to me as a mom. I share parenting posts. Every now and then I'll share one of my posts about writing or blogging because I do know that there are a lot of bloggers reading, but for the most part, it's just random people at home or checking out my posts. The things that get the most interaction are not typically my posts about writing or anything else. It's sometimes blog posts I do or sometimes funny videos that are also being shared other places. So you have to kind of think about on each platform, what are you going to share? What kind of content? On Twitter, I do share, I have humor. Like if I'm not doing links, I'll have humorous quotes from my family, my kids, things that we've said, or snarky remarks about different things. But Twitter, I'm happy to share funny things, but when I'm actually sharing links, I tend to share mostly things that are actually related to writing, blogging, or social media, because that's the majority of my following on Twitter. Yes, some of those people are also moms. Yes, I do share some of my posts from KirstenOliphant.com about parenting or recipes. But for the most part, I know who my Twitter crowd is because I've gone through the process of looking at those analytics and I know what they like. And that's what I tend to share. I don't really use Google+. Instagram, I have 2 separate accounts. And again, this is one of the things you have to think about with your guidelines is if you have, which many of us do, not all of us, but many of us do have sort of 2 separate entities. You may have one blog where you talk about one thing and another where you talk about another. You have to think about, do you need separate things? For Twitter, I decided to keep it together because I think Twitter, again, it moves so quickly. I think it's really okay to share different kinds of content. Again, it's still, I hope that my writing voice will come through in who I am and what I share. But I do share different kinds of content. Again, mostly it's related to writing, blogging, and social media, but I am going to throw in the random parent post or the humorous post about what's happening with my family. Facebook groups, that's easy. It depends on the group. Instagram, like I was starting to say, I do have 2 separate accounts. I really don't post on either right now. I've kind of decided to give Instagram a break for a little bit. But what I share at each of those is different when I was using both. One was family oriented and one was related to writing, social media, blogging. So once you think about sharing, another thing you're going to start to think about, and this is where it gets into the nitty gritty of actual writing, is your word choices and vocabulary. And yes, this sounds super nerdy. We're taking it back to high school or college, your word choices. So for me, because again, I'm going through my guidelines and kind of giving examples, I want to be professional and personal. Okay, I am going to share personal things and I am going to share them from the personal point of view. I am going to seem more like a person than an academic voice. And it actually, coming from, I have a graduate degree in fiction, but coming from an English background where I wrote paper after paper after paper of literary criticism, it was really hard for me to break free of the academic voice in which I use bigger words. I speak in a way that is not how I speak on Facebook, for example, on your updating your status. It's really different. It's a lot thicker. I use bigger words. I use longer sentences. I'm speaking in a more stiff way because that's the academic voice. So in my new book, Email List Made Easy for Writers and Bloggers, for example, this is the first time I feel like I'm finally able in a non-fiction way to bring in a voice that's personal and not academic. So you may find that you have a voice you have to break because I was just really used to that. In fiction and just in life, my normal voice is different. But when I came to writing nonfiction, I found that I wrote in what would be a really boring way, which is probably perfect for an English paper. So my professional is more fun. Again, like I said, I'm dealing with platform building, which some people really do think is fun, but a lot of people just struggle. So I want it to be fun. And I am fun. It's so much more, it was so freeing to me to finally embrace the fact that I want to teach people and talk to people in a way that feels a little bit more off the cuff, even if it's things that I know a lot about and feel like kind of an expert in, that it's more off the cuff, that it's more personal, it's more fun, it's quirky, it's silly, it's okay to mix those things up. When you're thinking about that, you have to think about, okay, do I want to use slang? Am I going to use pop culture kind of terms? Am I going to reference pop culture kinds of things? I really don't like misspellings. And so if I ever use the wrong version of your, then it's a mistake, or autocorrect, it's not me, because I don't want to do that. I'm not going to use you are to mean your. Even on Twitter, when you have limited characters, I really can't stand those kinds of, there's very few abbreviations I would use on Twitter, and definitely not you are for your. So those are things personally, and some of those harken back to being an English major. But also, I think for me, that doesn't speak professionally. And so even though I'm fun, I'm not going to speak like it's a text message when I'm on Twitter. Emojis, that's another thing. I love emojis. They're really fun. I typically save them for Facebook messages and text messages. I don't really use them on Twitter or other places. And I don't have that in a guideline. Like I'm never going to do it, but because I've seen some people actually use them really well, even in blog posts, which I always am like, there's an emoji in there. It seems weird to me, but I've seen people use them really effectively. I'm not saying I won't ever, but typically I save those for my more personal conversations and maybe like in a reply on Facebook, but not typically in my posts. I will sometimes use the old-fashioned smiley face of like the colon and half parentheses in my emails because I do think sometimes tone can be hard to read in email. It's very easy actually to misread in an email. And if you've ever gotten in a fight with a family member or someone else over email, you know what I'm talking about, that people misread tone all the time. So I do sometimes use those just as an extra way to bring some life into emails, which are sometimes dry. And I think if we're really being effective with our words, probably you don't even need that. But I do think sometimes those soften the tone. And in fact, I just read an article where I was talking about the fact that periods are dead in text messages because actually what they communicate, especially to the younger generation, is anger. And so like in text messages, you're not supposed to use periods anymore because a period tells people you're mad, which I find insane. And I am not going to use that. Either I'm going to use periods in my text messages, but considering things like that, we need to kind of consider the broader culture of how things seem to people, which is why I will use a smiley face when I'm replying to an email from someone. So I do talk about diverse things. I want to be unified as much as possible. So again, I'm trying to use and establish a voice that will carry through. And I'm still developing mine. I think this is not something you develop and then you have it. I think you can kind of fall into a groove of it. And maybe you can look through those analytics and that will help you. I think Twitter is one of the hardest places, but one of the best places to develop your voice because it's so short. You really have to pack that punch in there. I think Twitter can be a really great editor. And even if you're writing a blog post, I found one of the tricks that I use is if you're doing one of the click to tweet kind of plugins, try to plug in one of your quotes that you really like from your blog post into there. And if it's too long, try to shorten it so that it works. including the link. And I find that when I do that, often I come up with a much better, stronger sentence that cuts out unnecessary things. So I think Twitter can be a really great place to develop your voice. There's a lot of forgiveness, I think, on Twitter, unless you make a big giant mistake. But in terms of people post there a lot, so it's not like you're going to post something and 6 hours later, someone's going to see it and be mad. That tends to not be how it works so much, even with the algorithm that they have. Speaking out loud is a really good tip. Because you really need to practice when it comes down to developing these guidelines for how you're going to sound. You need to speak out loud, especially if you're going to develop a persona that is more personal. If that's what works for your business and speaks to your audience, that's fine. Academic voices, I think, sometimes come across better written. So maybe you want to practice a lot of writing. If you're trying to develop and hone a personal voice, maybe you want to go back and read some of your tweets out loud. Maybe you want to read your blog posts out loud. I keep saying out loud. If you want to read your blog posts out loud, I'm not Scooby-Doo or Shaggy here. You want to kind of read those out loud, maybe read them before you post them out loud and hear how it sounds. And sometimes when you're doing that, you will edit them in a way that makes them sound better, like a speech pattern. Now, the caveat to this is we don't write just how we talk. And so a lot of people are using dictation for different things, and I haven't so much yet. I may try that with fiction. But something I learned in, I think in graduate school that really applies here is that when you're writing dialogue, you really don't actually, like if you recorded a conversation I had with someone and then straight up typed that into a novel, it does not read like dialogue. Okay, so there is a difference between the spoken word and the written word. So you don't want to necessarily take everything literally and straight word for word. But I think when you're reading your words out loud as a test, or maybe saying them out loud and kind of writing them down and then editing them as you have them down, it can help you establish more of that writing voice. And then again, as you're using the different platforms, you're going to be forced to modify them based on that platform. Twitter is the biggest one for this because, again, you only have a limited number of characters in there to use. And so I think when you're using Twitter, it's going to help you a lot more in terms of that self-editing that you're going to have to do. But across the different platforms, that voice may sound a little bit different because you may have more room to explain your idea or less room. You may want to start with Twitter because then you can get that idea and that message to a concise way that later you can expand upon and get it better for other platforms where you have more room to speak. But if you start with those bigger platforms, then you may have trouble honing it down to get just that soundbite that kind of is Twitter. So in conclusion, I think the important things to really remember are this. You need to know your why. You need to know your who for who your audience is. You create a persona, establish guidelines, and then you need to consider the context as you communicate. All of these things are going to help you to create a more branded voice that goes across even the different social platforms. Even though you're speaking into a different context, you're still you because you've created a persona with guidelines and you're still going to speak to your who, even if they're on different platforms, you're still going to be reaching that same target audience on the different platforms using your persona and carrying those things through even in the different contexts. So again, head over to creativewriting.com/049 to get some guidelines to help you kind of go through what these look like and what this would be like for you so that you can actually sit down as I did and kind of go through the guidelines and create an idea of what's going to be your persona and then kind of hone in on that voice. So I'm excited to actually give this talk, and it will sound a little different in the context of Houston Social Media Day because again, we're not going to always sound the same across every platform. And neither will I. This talk will be a little bit different for Houston Social Media Day, but it was really nice to get to kind of speak everything now so that tomorrow it's going to feel more familiar. And maybe that's a talk for another time too, if you guys would be interested in how to plan a talk that you're going to give. Not that I'm an expert in that, but I've done a lot of speaking and I think I've finally kind of honed in on my process for coming up with a talk and how to do that, even though I hated public speaking and somehow got out of every single possible public speaking opportunity ever in high school. Never did it. No, once. No, none. So anyway, I went from that to somehow avoiding all of the oral reports I ever was asked to do in high school to where now I actually love speaking and do it in front of large groups. So in any case, thank you guys for being kind of my guinea pigs. And I hope this was helpful for you to think about branding your own voice because I think that is super important, but it's not something that is as easy as hiring somebody or creating a logo. As a reminder, go pick up my book while it's still 99 cents through July 1st. You can find that on Amazon. I will have it more places soon, so be patient if you're not using a Kindle or you don't want to have the Kindle reader on your computer. That's the other thing. If you have a computer or a tablet, you can actually just get the Kindle reader for free and read it there. A lot of people I know read. I have the Kindle app on my phone, and so I actually don't use my Kindle as often as I use that app. So that's a good tip. If you are like, I'll have to wait. Well, you don't have to. You can get the Kindle app. It's free. And then read on your device. Thank you, as always, to Jasmine Commerce for providing the music for this show, which I love. You can find more from her, and it's all just as delightful at jasminecommercemusic.com. Again, the show notes are creativewriting.com/049. If you're not subscribed and getting my weekly emails, you need to be. You're missing out, I swear. So the Quick Fix goes out on Thursdays. I rarely send other emails. I did this week about my book. But if you want to subscribe to the Quick Fix and get curated links and resources from me every week, you can subscribe at creativewriting.com/subscribe. Thank you guys again so much for listening, and I hope you have an inspired week.